Oh, welcome back for lecture on topic 4.2 for AP Comparative Government, Objectives of Election Rules. Learning objective, explain how election rules serve different regime objectives regarding ballot access, election wins, and constituency accountability. Let's first start with a couple terms here. So in our first topic, topic 4.1, we looked at how election system and rules are organized in each of the AP6 countries. Now our job is to explain how election rules accomplish different regime objectives regarding ballot access, election wins, and constituency accountability. And in order to do this, we got to start with reviewing proportional versus first past the post election structures, as well as single member versus multi-member districts. So, in proportional representation election systems, parties appoint legislative members proportional to the election results. This system promotes multiple parties being represented in the legislative branch and is sometimes called party list elections. Some proportional systems feature multi-member districts. With the appointment of representatives by party leaders, proportional representation systems can help increase the number of women and minority community representatives to appointed legislative seats. So if you take a look at the charts here that you see on the screen, this hypothetical proportional election system for a legislative chamber with 200 seats, you'll see like the party names are typically what you would find on the ballot. So for the sake of this hypothetical situation, you just have the left party, center party, and right party. But on an actual ballot, those would list out the actual names of the political party for the country. And you see the proportional votes earned or the percentage of votes earned and resulting in the proportion of total seats in the right-hand column. Single-member district plurality systems tend to promote two-party systems. So they provide voters with strong constituency service and accountability because there's a single representative per district, and they ensure geographic representation. In single-member district plurality systems, one candidate with the most votes in the district wins sole representative seat. So the sole representative seat is that same system that we have here in the United States, where the state is divided into both state and federal legislative districts, and each district has one representative. So just to wrap that up, in single-member districts, one person represents the constituency. In multi-member districts, individuals vote for a party, and multiple members of that party are elected to represent that constituency. So let's now take a look at how these systems or rules can help promote democratization. Now, if you remember, back in the first unit of comparative, we talked about democratization. It is the process that aims to provide the characteristics found in democracy. Those characteristics include more competitive elections, fairness in elections, and transparency in elections, universal suffrage for adults, and increased participation in policymaking. In a proportional representation, can result in an increase in the number of political parties represented in national legislatures, as well as an increase in the election of minority and women candidates. All characteristics necessary for democracy. Now, on the issue of minority candidates, that could be, religious minorities. It could be ethnic minorities. We see examples of both in AP6 countries. Moving on to single-member districts. Again, single-member district plurality systems tend to promote two-party systems. They provide voters with strong constituency services and accountability because there is a single representative per district, and they ensure geographic representation. Now let's look at this by country. In the UK, has directly elected single-member district first-past-the-post rules. Voters must be 18 years old. There is universal adult suffrage, so men and women have the right to vote. In more local elections, Scotland and in Wales, the age to vote is 16, but that's only in local elections. So this is an established or a substantive, the UK that is an established or substantive democracy. And as you can see, there's universal suffrage, access to the ballot for the legislative branch, and because of the single-member districts, a strong commitment to constituency services, again, and accountability, because there's a single representative. Now, constituency services are services that representatives provide to their district. So that could be addressing funding needs for various local problems, education-related issues, business-related issues. It's basically serving as a conduit between constituencies and the national level of government to address particular issues. In Mexico, representatives are directly elected under single-member district, first-past-the-post, and proportional representation for the lower house of the legislature. And then for the upper house, the Senate, there's a three-seat constituency for each state, and then a small number of proportional representation. Political parties have worked to instill gender quotas in the party lists for proportional parts of the system, and voters age 18 and older, men and women, are able to vote. So Mexico's history here is a little bit different. This is an authoritarian nation that has been in the process of democratizing and is considered an emerging or procedural democracy. There are direct elections for the legislative branch. There's universal suffrage. We have proportional and first past the post, and this encourages multiple parties. Constituency services, as a result of the single-member district, greater level of accountability because there's a single representative per district. Those individuals can be held accountable by regular elections. And then gender quotas within the party lists have allowed for women to have more of a role in Mexican politics. Moving on to Russia. State Duma elections in Russia have returned it to a system in which half of the representatives are directly elected from single-member districts, and the other half are chosen through elections that use proportional representation with a threshold of 7%. So in order to win seats in the Duma, a particular party has to achieve at least 7% of the vote. Russia has universal suffrage, so voters 18 years old, men and women, have the right to vote. So this is, again, fairly similar to Mexico with a hybrid regime, authoritarian with elements of democratization, but under Putin, largely moving back towards authoritarianism. The idea of proportional representation allows for more political parties to have seats in the Duma. However, the United Russia Party, which is Putin's party, pretty much dominates, and it's actually quite difficult for other parties to get 7 to 15% of the vote. So in other words, there's questions about free and fair elections and the possibility of minor parties' ability to actually win an election. In China, the National People's Congress selects members indirectly through a series of local and regional elections. China is authoritarian, as you're aware. Local elections are the only elections that are direct in China. Offices that are directly elected are mayors, head of counties, and the local legislature. After the local elections, the people of China have no direct say in elections, and even the local elections provide candidates approved by the Communist Party. Individuals have little say on policy making. The party selects representatives within their hierarchy. There's few services that are provided at the national level, and there's little contact between the upper level of the legislature and constituencies. This is really a one-party system with little to no competition. In Iran, the Majlis, members of the Majlis are directly elected in single-member and multi-member districts, which sometimes requires a second round of voting. Candidates are vetted by the Guardian Council. The legislative body lacks formal political party structures. A small number of the 290 seats in the Majlis are reserved for non-Muslim minorities, such as Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians. Voters must be 18 years old. Men and women have the right to vote. So Iran, again, authoritarian, and although there are single-member and multi-member districts that are directly elected, candidates have to be vetted by the Guardian Council, which means that the theocracy controls who actually runs for office, which ultimately means that the theocracy is the part of the state that has the most political control and control over policymaking. The legislature has little say in policy making. There's little to no formal party structures, so multiple parties are not formally organized, like in the more democratic course countries. However, much like Mexico, quotas are involved, and a small number of seats are maintained for, like I mentioned, religious minorities in the Majlis. And remember, in Mexico, seats are reserved for women. All right, so what you're going to need to be able to do with this information, you need to identify the electoral rules and systems for each of the course countries. You need to be able to recognize how those systems and rules are impacted by whether or not the regime is authoritarian or democratic. However, different political systems use electoral regulatory organizations to set various rules about ballot access and competition. 3 countries in particular we need to focus on in this regard. In Iran, the Guardian Council, like we mentioned, must approve inclusion on the ballot. This means that there is a severe restriction to ballot access, unlike the UK, for instance. And as part of their democratic transition, Mexico and Nigeria have created independent election commissions that attempt to reduce voter fraud and manipulation and enhance electoral competition. Compare this to Russia, which is another hybrid regime, which has no mechanism in place. And in 2011, there was an outcry both inside and outside Russia in regard to the election results and possible voter fraud. And this is a level of voter fraud that tends to result in united Russia consolidating more and more power through Vladimir Putin. Now, not all course countries have elections. Some regimes use an appointment system for membership in legislative bodies to promote a diversity of viewpoints, while other regimes use it to advance the political agenda of governing elites. And here are, 3 examples of regimes, both democratic and authoritarian, that use appointment systems to promote diversity and maintain the agenda of the governing elite. So first, in the UK, appointments for the UK's House of Lords are approved by the monarch with recommendations made by the prime minister and an independent commission. This system is used to promote diversity, as there are now more of these appointments than hereditary appointments to the House of Lords. This promotes diversity in the House of Lords, which is not directly elected because the majority of the seats are no longer simply passed down within a family. Moving on to Iran, half of Iran's Guardian Council members are selected by the Supreme Leader, and half of the nominees from the judiciary with Majlis approval. This allows for more diversity and that you have more voices appointing nominees, but all appointed officials must follow Sharia law, and the Supreme Leader is ultimately able to have the final say in all decisions. And then there's Russia. The appointment process, and this is something we've talked about in class already, the appointment process for positions in Russia's Federation Council, which is its upper house in the legislature, is done by regional governors and the regional legislature. The creation of 9 federal districts with the annexation of Crimea has reasserted federal power under the Russian president, Putin, by allowing him to appoint presidential envoys to the districts and allowing regional legislatures to forego elections and appoint a governor from a list of candidates approved by the president, by Putin himself. So this is a way for an authoritarian regime to control the political agenda, as only political elites within United Russia will ultimately be selected to serve in the Federation Council. Now, presidential elections. So another key concept in 4.2 are presidential elections. So far, we focused on legislatures. So different presidential systems, election systems, have different rules for determining election winners. Some systems employ second round or runoff elections to obtain a majority vote, while others decide votes based on plurality of votes among votes that are cast for candidates in a particular race. So let's look at each country. The big thing you're going to need to be able to do is when you see, this is a potential FRQ topic, really, and they tend to fall under the describe task verb, where you're asked to describe presidential elections in coarse countries. When we're thinking about a response to that type of FRQ, we are not going to use the UK or China as potential examples, because the UK does not have a presidential executive and China does not have elections for president. The party selects the president. And in the case of the UK, the majority party in the House of Commons appoints a prime minister. So let's look at Mexico. In Mexico, the president is elected by a plurality of the national popular vote, not an absolute majority. Simple example, just for the sake of understanding this concept. So let's say candidate Gabriel won the plurality for school vice president with 40% of votes, while Chiara came in with 35% and Carl with 25%. If Gabriel had received 54%, he would have received both the majority and plurality. But in this example, if only a plurality is needed, Gabriel didn't need. He had the most 40% votes. So he did not also need a majority. Looking at Nigeria, presidential candidates must win the most votes and secure at least 25% of the vote in 2/3 of Nigeria's states. And the purpose of this is to reflect the federal characteristic of this regime. Notice that the candidate must win the most votes, not an absolute majority, with the specifics listed of winning 25% in 2/3 of Nigeria's states. Now, this is an interesting setup. If we think back to the U.S. Constitution and the Electoral College, one of the goals of the Electoral College is to ensure that candidates have support from around the country instead of just appealing to a specific region. And here, in this case with Nigeria, this system is meant to do the same thing. In Russia, moving on to Russia, presidential candidates must win an absolute majority of the popular vote in either the first or second round of national voting. And if no candidate wins an absolute majority in the first round, the second round is conducted between the top two vote earners from the first round. In other words, the winner must win more than half of the total votes that are cast in the election. And then in Iran, presidential candidates must win an absolute majority of the popular vote in either the first or second round of national voting. If no candidate wins an absolute majority in the first round, the second round is conducted between the top two vote earners in the first round. So we're talking about runoff elections. So again, the winner must win more than half of the total votes, a majority. All right. One thing to keep in mind in regards to Iran, Nigeria, and Russia is that the majoritarian rules provide winners with a nation-wide mandate or a national mandate. In other words, if they win the majority of the vote, it's viewed as having support of the people to pass policies they see fit because the majority of citizens voted for the candidate and their platform. And again, that's fairly similar to the intentions of the Electoral College system in the United States. All right, to wrap this up, let's take a look at this chart. It shows executive and legislative term limits. These are concepts you definitely need to know. So in the UK, there are no executive term limits. In the legislature, Prime Minister selected by Parliament, coming from the majority. The Parliaments Act of 2011 introduced fixed terms for Parliament of 5 years. There's the no confidence vote that can change the legislature as well. And an early election can be called if 23 members of Parliament vote to do so. Mexico, there is a 1 6-year term limit with no option for re-election. Senators serve 6-year terms in the legislature. After 2018, senators are eligible to run for a consecutive second term, but again, limited to 2 terms. The Chamber of Deputies serve a 3-year term, and after, again, a 2018 law, are eligible to run for a consecutive second term. In Nigeria, the president serves a 4-year term with a limit of 2 terms. And in the legislature, senators serve 4-year terms, and there are unlimited terms. And then members of the House of Representatives serve a 4-year term. In Russia, the president serves a 6-year term. There is a 2 consecutive term limit, but Putin is now serving as president for, this is his 3rd time after he term limited out and did a stint as prime minister. Election laws have been recently changed to effectively remove term limits. In the legislature and the Federal Assembly, members serve a 4-year term, or they can be replaced because of changes in governorship. In the Duma, terms were initially 2-year terms, but they have since been changed a couple times. They were 4-year terms, and then in 2011 they were changed to 5-year terms. And again, this is to concentrate power in United Russia. China, the president serves a 5-year term, but in 2018 the 2-term limit was removed So Xi Jinping can effectively serve as long as the Politburo of the Communist Party will allow him to. Members of the National People's Congress serve a 5-year term. And then in Iran, the supreme leader has no set term limit, but can be removed by the Assembly of Religious Experts. That's never been done. The president serves a 4-year term with a 2-term limit. And then over in the Majlis, members serve 4-year terms. All right, to quickly wrap this up, two key concepts that you really need to be aware of. Again, the idea that election rules are used to, for example, in Iran, to ensure representation of religious minorities, or in Mexico to ensure representation of women. But again, in both those instances, because it is a small number of seats, it is fairly limited influence from those parties. And then the timing of elections across the 6 countries can vary among systems based on term limits. You should be able to identify if there are or are not term limits and the length of those term limits. And you're going to want to be able to assess or access that information, particularly for FRQs. So know this chart that you see on the screen. And we will work with this in class a little bit. All right, so that is a wrap for topic 4.2. It is a long one. Sorry about that, but it is what it is. Have a great day.